Welcome to Dispatches from the Front. My guest today is Detective Constable John of the Metropolitan Police, and John has been a specialist in child abuse matters. And for our audience, I have to say he has some really incredible things to say about what he's experienced and some of the procedures that he's encountered within the Met Police. So, John, welcome.
Thank you.
It's good to have you here in the UK Column studio after all this time. Just start somewhere at the beginning. Just tell us a little bit about yourself and just when did you become a policeman and what sort of things have you done before you got near the child protection issues?
Well, I joined the police in the beginning of the 1990s. My early career was just as a uniform officer. And I sort of soon progressed quickly into the CID department, and all was going well without incident. And then I moved on to a specialist operation, which was tracking down transient paedophiles because the Sex Offenders Registry Act had been brought in 1997, and they were finding that a lot of sex offenders were going off the radar, were going missing. So I was asked to front part of the Met's effort into tracking down some of the transient paedophiles. That was, it was an honour to do it, and it was a good little role. But things started to sort of go awry with it because there was two sex offenders, which my remit was the inland waterways of London, but it soon spread to a national basis. And they had information that sex offenders were coming out of prison after conviction, caution or serving a sentence for what they call a Schedule 1 sexual offence, were required to sign the sex offenders register and just go missing. But they would go in to live on canal boats. They said, we've got two. We think there's probably a couple more. You're on it for the next few months. See if you can, double the figures and find two more. Well, what happened was within a few months I'd found 90. And with that, sort of exposed that there was a loophole in the law that allowed people to live on canal boats, avoid registry, and just act with impunity.
So these people could have anonymous lives, effectively. They're there living in an area, but because they're on a boat, they don't have to identify themselves. They're not on the council register.
Nothing.
Electoral register, yeah.
Yeah, they were, basically living like a free life, and no one knew who they were, what they were doing or anything. But there's quite a few factors that were involved. The one is that there's quite like, back then was like a hippie alternative community. There was a bit of an anti-police vibe to it, and if you're a fellow boater, as it were, you was instantly liked and welcomed by this community. But the community, actually, some of them didn't realise who they were having living next door to them. And on a few occasions, some of these people were pulling up into a boating community, and there was children there, and they were offering to act as babysitters and things like that, and there were some dangerous sex offenders there. And the canal system back then, no one ever went there. It was sort of basically out the remit, but canals are so old that they sort of transgressed boundary borders. So the Registry Act said that you had to register as a sex offender within the police district where you resided within 28 days. But some of these canals, they actually straddled police districts. On some occasions, 3 or 4 districts would merge at one area. So you could be living on a canal boat, and on your 27th day, you move to the other side of the bank, and then you get another 28 days. And not only that, kids are attracted to canals. And also, back then, there was a programme called Rosie and Jim.
Just remind me when you're talking, what date?
We're talking about sort of late 90s now,
right.
Late 90s, early 2000s. And there was a children's programme, Rosie and Jim, and it was sort of like glamorising life on a canal, and it's not a bad life, but, these people were living on there and no one knew who they were or what they were doing. And what happened then was that highlighted what was going on and started getting a lot of national interest from national crime agencies, and started getting a lot of help from what used to be the National Crime Squad and also the Scotland Yard's paedophile unit, we were working jointly because of the successes I was having. And I can always remember a corridor conversation, as we call it, by a very seasoned, experienced paedophile unit detective, a real good man. And he drags me to one side and he said, you know, it's a bizarre world because in any form of policing, when you get too good at your job, you get promoted and you get looked after. In this game, when it involves those high up, and by that he was meaning politicians, people in the upper echelons of society, he said it's a problem. I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, I'm hearing your name mentioned in a lot of places now. He said, you're getting a bit too good at what you're doing. He said, you've got to be very, very careful, son. And I said, well, why? Why is it like that? And he turned around to me and he said, right, he said, on 2 occasions, we had Leon Britton, the MP, Tory MP, we had him banged to rights. And on both occasions, the funding was pulled. He said, they will do the same to you. Well, the odd thing happened was that, I mean, I knew who Leon Britton was, but I had no interest in politics or anything like that back in them days. And I can even remember asking, like my mum, I said, you know, Leon Britton, is he, you know, a man of any note? And she said, well, I know he's an MP. I said, well, all right. And didn't really say much. And literally 2 weeks after that, I get called into a senior officer's room. He said, come and see me, come and see me.
What sort of rank officer would that be?
We're talking Chief Inspector at the time. But it was a small unit, so Chief Inspector was quite senior, really, you know. And he said, look, I'm sorry to say it, he said, but we're withdrawing you from the operation. I said, but why? He said, look, I can't tell you, but it's come from high up, it's being shut down. And I thought, well, I was a bit confused. I said, but that's unfair, you know, this is really going places. And he said, look, you're going to be commended and you can have any job you want. Don't worry about it. We've been told to look after you, but unfortunately it's out of my hands. It's been pulled.
So they were shutting down all of the work in relation to paedophiles living in this canal network.
Yeah, and I was the only sort of national steer. It was me. I was the focal point. And I was getting inquiries from all over the world, coming from the Falkland Islands, the Channel Islands, a lot of the islands, funny enough, but everywhere they were coming in, you know, reports of sex offenders on boats. It was just getting, it was going stupid. It was just mushrooming. And I just couldn't get it. But then this fella's words resonated with me. And I was disgusted with it, to be honest, and I couldn't get any answers. No answers at all. And it was the fellas that were working on the support side of it, they were really apologetic and upset, and they said, look, it was nothing we could do about it. So I said, well, I'm not staying, I'm leaving. So I left, and I got a job with, it was, you know, quite an elite little unit. It was the police's clubs and vice unit. And the clubs and vice, they had the governance for anything to do with vice, whether it be prostitution or gambling, but also for a lot of the main licences for the big nightclubs, because London is like the club in central, you know, for Europe. So I went on to this job, and I got a job with what they call the Street Offences Unit. And street offences relates to the old Street Offences Act of the last century, which refers to prostitution, street prostitution. And our job was to go and sort of arrest street prostitutes, really, but also we had governance for juveniles. So if a juvenile was found on the street in a red light area late at night, believed involved in it, they were to be sort of brought in, taken into protective custody. And every now and then a child would be found, usually a girl, and our job was to then bring her in, inform social services. The kid would then be placed into protective police custody while social services work out emergency protection orders, EPOs.
What sort of age for the girls then?
At 14, you know, it tended to be under 17. The law was a bit, the law prior to the implementation of the amended sex offence, I forget what it's called now, not sex offenders. It's to do with child sexual offences, but it'll come to me. The Sexual Offences Act, I think, it got amended 2003, was quite complicated, you know, and it was going back to, it was gender specific as well. So offences against boys were different against offences against girls. And anyway, so we would find these kids and take them into custody and everything else. But the problem then was that it was a competitive environment. So it was number crunching. So you were given a target of each car that was put out. 3 cars were put out per night, and you would have a competition who could arrest as many prostitutes as you can, and 10 would be a good figure. And if you did that every day of the week, you was the top team. So there was competitions, and you could process a prostitute very quickly via the custody. And it was pointless because all of them were drug addicts. All of them had come from the care system. And if you brought a kid in, that was your night finished. The car was taken off the road, and that was it, so that you wouldn't get the figures. So you was encouraged not to deal with them.
Right, that is a very interesting comment, isn't it, for people who look to the police to be protecting the weak and vulnerable in society, and you're saying that the regime to get the targets for the prostitutes means that vulnerable children we don't want to take them.
Well, it is. I mean, it's shocking because if you think about it, if a man has sex with a prostitute, it's the woman who commits the offence, right? But that's a woman of consenting age. Someone has sex with a child, that's rape. And you're talking a major crime offence. You're talking an offence that carries a life tariff. Yet they're committing major crime, and you're sort of dissuaded from dealing with it. And I remember bringing one little girl in. She was 14, around about 14, and a lot of these kids were undernourished, and they were heavily infected with diseases like hepatitis C, some with HIV and things like that, you know. And so they looked younger than their age. And one young girl brought in, she had scabies due to her lifestyle. And the moaning that they gave me for bringing the girl in, because they said the car will now need to be cleaned, the room that you take them to will now need to be fumigated. The girl's a pain in the arse because she's always shouting and screaming, and you know, and it's pointless anyway because she'll be back out tomorrow. So it was appalling, really. There was, you know, and what they said, if you see them again, just tell her to do one to get out of here.
Right, and this was being told to all the police. It wasn't just yourself. Anybody who was involved in this type of work was told this.
That was told. Yeah, that was the rule, the unwritten rule.
Right.
And so they never dealt with it. But what happened was there was information from the moment I came in regarding one particular woman, and her name was Foxy. Her street name was Foxy, and she was a larger than life character. And she was a street prostitute, but she was rumoured to be pimping out young girls. And I'd heard the rumours from the moment I walked in the office, but nothing was ever done about this woman. Anyway, I sort of got moved on merit. I did very well on the street. And
what was your rank then?
Detective,
right?
You know, and I was chosen to go onto quite an elite little unit, not dealing with vice. It was dealing with other stuff, more organised crime. And I went on to that, and I did incredibly well. But then I was asked to come back to vice and to be the senior investigating officer in an allegation of child prostitution. So, but by that time, I think what we need to establish as well is that from 2000, I had been a lone parent of 4 children. I've been left to bring up 4 children, and the relevance will become apparent, you know, shortly. So not only was I then asked to work again back with the children, I was now looking after children of my own, and you know, they were all at that time under 10, and one was an infant. So it was a bit hard going for me, and the hours were irregular, and you know, childcare was a bit of a nightmare, especially if you're dealing with kids, being taken in care orders. You know, your day could be a long one. But you know, I was sort of told, look, you know, we'd like you to go on it. So I did it. And it was a young girl called Zoe. And Zoe had, she was, I think, about 14 or something like that. Again, very young looking for her age. So Zoe looked about 12. And she'd made an allegation that this woman, Foxy, had been pimping her out. And she'd made a couple of allegations, and they hadn't gone anywhere. So what I was told was, look, can you look into it? She's made allegations before. She's a bit of a nightmare. She might be lying. She might not, but she's a bit persistent. See what you can do. So I went, okay. So I went to see the girl, made an appointment, and was told she's very anti-police, you know, and she is a bit of a handful. So I went with a colleague. They made the introduction, introduced me to this girl, and you know, and what I used to do was I was good with the kids, so we'd sit down and I'd just start doodling or drawing or something like that, engaging them, and then ice-breaking stuff, and then the conversation, the narrative begins. Anyway, we started chatting and everything else, and she turned around to me. She said, "You know, you're different to all the others." I went, "Well, that's all right. You know, I don't mean to. You know, and I wouldn't even dress like the other coppers. I was always scruff bag, really. You know, I hated wearing a suit. You know, and I liked the street. I was good on the street. You know, and she said, you know, I like you. I'm happy to talk to you." I said, "Okay, well, let's do it properly then." She said, "Yeah, all right." So we had an agreement. We shook hands. We made an appointment to do a proper, what they call an ABE interview, which is like a video recorded interview. And we sat down, we had a chat, we interviewed her, and she told me the story start to finish. And she's the product of broken family. The mother was a drug addict, the father was absent, and the mother was buying drugs off this girl Foxy, and Foxy then started to groom her because her mother was unable to look after her. She then ended up living with the grandparents, but the grandparents lived in a red light area. And so Foxy would go and pick this young girl up and a basic grooming, look after her, show her some attention, a bit of love, do her hair for her, give her makeup, but then introduce her to cannabis, got her smoking cannabis, and then would then take her to hotels. These were bottom-end hotels. These were the sort of places where a lot of the builders would go to, you know. So there'll be like converted Victorian houses or whatever. In one area of London, there's a big row of them. And a lot of them were maintenance and building works from the north would come down and stay in these hotels. So Foxy had an agreement with the night porters, and the night porters would make a room available for her. So she would take her clients in there. So she'd go in there with her client, start having sex and have this young girl there watching, and then encourage the young girl to get involved. And then from there, she would then start giving the young girl the bigger drugs. So the Class A drugs is what they want the kids on. Once they got them on the Class A drugs, especially the crack cocaine, it's got a real grip on them, you know. And this girl had no way of getting these drugs, so she relied on Foxy as her medicine lady, you know. So she got her on crack cocaine, and then she started then pimping the young girl out, getting the young girl involved. And then she would then get the girl to introduce her friends to it. So she was then introducing her friends. Also come from families that parents were drug addicts or absent or whatever. And so, or in the care system. In fact, all the kids we dealt with were subject to care orders, whether they were residential care orders or just normal care orders, you know. But they're all known to social services and from at-risk backgrounds. And so she gave me the name of another kid. So I went to see that girl. The story was identical. And the other thing was, they said, "Well, what about the police? Did the police ever get involved?" And both girls said, "Well, we would get hidden in a bush. If we was put on the street, if the police came, Foxy would hide us in a bush. But she knew the coppers anyway. She'd just flirt with them and they would just let her go." And she said, "But also there's a judge. There's a judge involved." I said, "What do you mean?" She went, "Oh, a judge at the magistrate's court." So when Foxy's charged and goes for the judge is her client anyway. So the judge lets her off. So I checked this out. I went through the disposal history, the criminal history of this girl, and found she keeps getting bindovers, this Foxy. So I thought, right, well, there's something in this. So all of a sudden, these girls then introduced me to other girls, who introduced me to other girls, and these ages went down to 9 years old.
Right.
And, you know, some came from traveller sites, some actually came from the residential care homes, and there was no one looking out for them. And these kids were known to the police because they were regular absconders from care. And they were regularly found in red light areas, and no one had actually pieced any of this together. So I started to pull it all together. The intelligence was just flowing, and information was coming in from drug dealers on the street. They were also concerned about it. And also other prostitutes were coming forward and talking to us, you know, and saying, you know, this is what's happening. I then got approached by a social worker, a senior social worker, and at the time this operation, this line of work was mainly in Westminster, and it started spiralling out to the outer boroughs of London and into the provinces. And this was from Croydon, and the social worker said, "Look, we've got a big problem down in Croydon." And my inquiries did then start to lead to Croydon.
And the significance of this is that it's now moving into areas of a better class of person. Is that what it means?
Well, what it's showing, at first it was central London because there is a transient population and people don't tend to live there, they just work there. And when they're working away from home, a bit like someone going to Thailand, they will commit a crime, like, of soliciting a prostitute or whatever, because they've got the anonymity of being a tourist. But when they live in an area, there's a different mindset. So it's going into an area that is more residential, and yeah, I would say some of the areas were bad areas. They were bad areas, and I think most of them had their own social problems. But there was a lot of residential kids' homes in these outer boroughs, and a lot of kids would be farmed out, and the kids would network. So if a kid was taken into a secure unit for whatever reason, they would go in there, they would network with other kids, and the main way of earning money was either through violent crime, robbery, or with the girls it was prostitution. So these networks were all set up, and no one was looking. There was no one looking into them at all. Anyway, a social worker from Croydon said, we've got a problem. I said, okay. And he said, look, we have meetings regularly about certain girls. She said, I'll give you a list of these girls, and they are in trouble. And one girl, she had such infection inside her that she would regularly pass blood and all sorts of, nastiness would come out because she had active cysts inside her through prostitution. And she was a young kid, She said, if something's not done, this girl's going to die. She's being pimped out. She's on her knees, this girl, She said, but we invite the police along. We have been doing it for nearly 10 years, and each time they refuse. I said, well, who are you inviting? They said, well, your unit, the vice unit. We've invited them so many times, they know about this. So I then went back in the records, and I went back 10 years, and I went back through all the records of kids found in red light areas over the last 10 years. And yeah, there was rights. And I was contacting some of these kids who are now adults. And I said, well, what was happening? They said, well, if the police found us, tell us to do one, get out of here. Or they just ignore us. They knew we were being pimped out. I said, did anyone get taken in for it? And they said, no, we were doing it all the time. So it'd been going on historically, and the unit had known about it. So
how long had it been going on for?
From the time I was on there, I'd gone back 10 years, and it had gone back further than that.
Right.
And these were in select red light areas, King's Cross, Islington, Westminster, all in London, and they were the main ones where the kids were being worked. But now Croydon was coming to know, but the police knew about Croydon as well. So these areas, it wasn't any news, But then what you've also got is missing persons units. So someone goes missing, a missing person unit will be appointed to look into, what's happened to them when they are investigating it. But every time a child comes back late or fails to attend a kids' home curfew, which will be an unreasonable hour, say like 9 o'clock, 8 o'clock, they don't turn up, the police are called, a form's filled out, and it's just a process because these kids do come back. And so these missing persons, they knew about them. They knew about these kids, and they were just seen as a nuisance. It was just a routine, so-and-so's gone missing again, they'll be back tomorrow. And they fill out the form, they call it ACE, Arse Covering Exercise. And it's the only reason they do it. No one looks into the reasons why these kids are going missing. So I drafted up a report. It was factually based, it was concise, and it had evidence. It had evidence backing it, and it was a précis of a report, and it was just highlighting the sheer extent of the problem, the history behind the problem, the results of the problem, the fact that the kids are suffering and they're also grooming other kids into it is self-perpetuating monster. And I just put a few of the opinions, the factual opinions of the social workers. And
in that report, were you also highlighting the fact that the police were not acting as they should, or police officers hadn't acted?
I mean, what I did was I was always mindful of the fact that I'll never reinvent the wheel, and I'm no better than anyone else. So I don't want to criticise a colleague. But what I put in, these kids were known to the police. These investigations were never followed up for whatever rationale. So I didn't criticise anyone, but it has to be noted that this isn't a new thing. This has been known about. But I also mentioned the fact that there are allegations involving a judge, and that other police officers are aware. And there was also someone connected to the music department of the BBC was involved, a manager of that. So, you know, and anyway, that went in, and I thought, right, well, they've been made aware now, and I would always put reports on for whatever reason. Reports would go on, intelligence reports. Police works on intelligence. And I then get a phone call within about an hour of the report going through, and it's from the governing detective inspector. And he said to me, John, about this report you put on. I was thinking, good, brilliant. You know, I've now shown them the goose that is giving the golden eggs, and hopefully this will move forward. You know, I really thought I was going to get praise for it. And then what happened was he said, we need to talk now. Get in my office now. I went, okay. So I went down to see him. I was in a different building. I travelled down, went in his office, and it was like someone had set a pit bull on me. Started swearing and shouting, and what have you done? You can't do things like this. He's shutting it down. I'm taking you off. So he withdrew me straight away from the operation, and that really upset me, you know, because I was moving forward, you know. And I thought, well, if I go, who else is going to, you know, no one can ever do the job as good as you do it. Do you know what I mean? And looking back on it, I did a good job, whereas others hadn't. And I don't want to be conceited, but that's what happened, you know. And I was mortified, absolutely mortified.
What was in your head about why you'd got this response? You thought you were going to be praised for it. You get attacked by a pit bull.
Yeah.
Why did you think it was?
Well, I mean, it was some sort of weird sort of cognitive distortion, because he turned around and said that we had known about this, and the reason the kids are talking to you now was because they were dealt with properly 10 years ago, and they're now happy to come forward and talk to you. It's nothing to do with my good work. It was to do with the good work of other officers before me. And it was just absolute dire nonsense. And I was just confused. I was literally totally confused. But it was done with such aggression, and what we used to call it in the police was a hairdryer, an old school shouting thing, you know, screaming and shouting. And I walked away really licking my wounds and scratching my head. So I thought, what? So I didn't go back to work. I thought, what the hell's going on? So I never went back to work the next day. And anyway, I get a phone call, and it was from the high-up boss, the detective chief superintendent of the unit. And he said, John, what's gone on? I said, well, I don't know. I'm a bit confused. He went, we need to have a chat. I said, okay. He said, well, don't rush back to work. Have the summer on me. And it was the summer. Take your kids away.
What date is this now?
This was we're talking about, I think about 2004, around that time. And this was in the summer, beginning of the summer. And he said, well, have the summer on me, you know. Go away with your kids, take your kids away. So he's aware of my family situation. He said, I know, you know, it's tough for you. Go away, and when you get back, when you're ready, let's sort all this out. It's not going to be a problem. And I'm going to be honest now, I like the fella. He was a nice bloke. He was a nice bloke. And so I said, really? He went, yeah, don't worry about it. He trivialised everything. So anyway, I came back, but it was on my mind all the time, because, you know, these kids weren't getting served anymore. There was no one there for these kids, you know. And they relied on you. They relied on you for protection, and they wanted to win. Because also behind this was organised criminality. The girl that was running it, she was backed up by some very, very serious gangsters, and it resulted in me getting credible death threats and everything. You know, there was money at stake here. There was a livelihood for these people, and they were connected gangsters, you know. And these kids were scared, and some of these kids, if they went back home, they went back to the ghettos where these people were operating, and they were petrified. So I came back to work, and sure enough, the boss calls me in, and I said to him, no, I'm not talking to you on my own, I want someone with me. So I got a representative from the Human Resources Department, personnel came, sat down, and he said to me, John, well, what's gone on? Made me a cup of tea. I said, well, I'll only talk to you if I can be honest. He said, well, yeah, that goes both ways. I said, okay. I said, well, what have I done? I said, I really thought I'd done well. I'd exposed this, I'd done this, I'd done it. And he turned around to me and said, well, that's a problem. You've exposed it. He said, we knew you could dig, but we never knew you could dig that deep. He then said, what you've exposed is going to F us, past, present and future. This cannot and will not ever get out. He said, if you mention a word of this, you will be thrown to the wolves. He then said, you will lose everything, and that means your job, your home, your kids, you will lose it all. You need to shut your effing mouth. And I was just dumbstruck. I was like, for real? And he said, we never thought you would dig this deep. You have no understanding how deep this goes.
So you're, excuse me, you're a detective constable, so one would have thought in your job, somebody who was professionally good at their job would be good at digging. You dig, you absolutely start to see what's going on, and then I'm just going to use the phrase, these people are so confident that they threaten you point blank in a room.
With a witness.
With a witness.
With a witness, yeah. At the time, my youngest boy was still quite young, and I was petrified. I'd have my kids taken off me. I really thought I'd crossed the mafia. And you're right, it was the confidence, the way it was portrayed against me. And the other thing, which was very bizarre, he said, how do you think you've been treated? Do you think you've been bullied? I went, you're damn right I've been bullied. He said, you have. You've been bullied. He said, there's a form to fill out, a fairness at work form. I'm instructing you to get it now and fill it out. And the police is absolutely awash with this form. There's forms for everything. And he told me the number of the form. He said, you fill it out, you put exactly what's gone on. You've got to do that, son. I said, I will. I will. And he said, and then do you know what happened to it? I went, well, it will go somewhere and get investigated. He said, no, I'll tell you what happened. He said, all those that you've mentioned will be brought in and they will be interviewed. I said, right, okay, good. That's brilliant. He said, and then it will come to me to be ratified. He said, and do you know what I'll do with it? I said, well, you pass it on to, the corruption command or something, I don't know. He said, well, not really. And he points to a bin. He'll go in that bin, and it will stay in that bin. He said, I will never betray fellow rank, and nor will they. You've no idea what you're up against. Shut your effing mouth. And he got my hand, and he said, you've got to give me a gentleman's agreement now. You never, ever look into child prostitution ever again. Now, what happened then, Brian, was I left there totally frightened, really frightened, and that was a bit of a spiral downhill for me. And then over the coming years, I left that unit. I left straight away, and I said to him, I can't work under you.
Yeah, so these are colleagues that you're doing a difficult and you're doing a dangerous job out on the ground, and you rely on the backing of your police colleagues to actually protect you against people who are organised crime. Why don't they go for you? Because they know if they go for you, you're going to be protected by the police. And here are your police colleagues simply turning around and threatening you in the same way, which is vicious.
Vicious, and it is a conspiracy. And I mean, conspiracies exist in law. You can conspire to commit murder. It's in statute law.
It's a criminal offence.
It's a criminal offence. Conspiracy is. So when people go, bandits, conspiracy theories, there's no theory about it. This is conspiracy reality. And I was in the centre of a very horrible conspiracy, and so frightened I couldn't tell anyone. I generally thought they would come for me and come for my children. And the other thing is, I've seen firsthand what the care system is, and there's nothing caring about it. It is a paedophile's playground. These kids and the other thing is, I was working with informants, and a lot of these informants have been in the care system, and one of them's turned around to me and said, whatever you do, you never let your children go into care, because what'll happen is, if you ain't there, one of my kids was a little bit behind with things, and I used to tell this bloke, he said, they'll go for him straight away. They will get it. Don't ever lay in bed thinking they won't get it. They will get it. And by get it, you know what I mean. And
right. So what happens now then? So you've been threatened.
What happens now is I say I can't work under you, so I leave, and I go on to a child abuse unit, and I end up in North London, a very busy part of North London, and I start on this unit, and they're investigating child abuse, and I'm in there, and I get approached by a detective sergeant and said, look, as well as being an investigator, do you want to take on an additional role? I said, well, like what? They said, well, there's all sorts of things you can do. I said, is there one to do with a liaison with children's homes? I went, yeah, there is. The girl left 2 years ago. I said, was there any issues with it? And she said, no issues. It's an easy number. You'll get given a day here and there to go and deal with it. There'll be the odd meeting, but over 2 years, she never had any issues at all. said, did child prostitution ever crop up? Oh, no, we don't get any of that. Well, okay, and this was the London borough of Haringey. Now, Haringey has the most amount of kids home of any sort of local authority in the country. I think there's about 22 to 26 care homes for a small London borough. Anyway, so I was given assurances that it wasn't a problem. So I picked up the phone and I asked for a list of all the care homes from social services. So they faxed it through because the police didn't have a copy of it. It came through and it had the phone numbers, and I rang them up first, and I said, this is so-and-so care home. I went, yeah. I told them who I was. I said, nothing to worry about, but this is what I'm looking into. But I went, oh, right. I said, how many children you got in? They said, about 5. I said, how many do you lose at a weekend to crime? And I'm on about prostitution and things like that. He went, oh, 3. I went, you what? I said, what? He said, yeah, they usually go missing on a Thursday and come back on a Monday. I said, do you think they're involved in prostitution? Oh, well, no, we know they are. I went, right, well, has the police ever been to speak to you about it? He went, no, the police come and pick up the missing persons form, but the kids come back. I said, well, what are the kids like? She said, oh, they're in the right state, some of them are bleeding, some of them are so high on drugs, we know that come Wednesday they're going to be kicking off because they've not had their drugs. They've all got money on them, and I said, oh my God. So that was like real time. So all of a sudden I've got 3 kids within 6 minutes. By the end of 3 days, I'd found 50 children. 50 children. So I held a strategy meeting and I brought in the social services. I brought in...
this is Haringey Social...
Haringey Social Services. I think Hackney might have turned up, neighbouring boroughs, and then because you get an overspill sometimes. I had a representative for who dealt with child trafficking for Barnardo's. I had connections, a lot of these youth NGO groups came. There was a lot of people there. And I laid out my plan, and I worked out a formula of how to deal with it using a simple act on the Children's Act, and a section of the Children's Act relating to taking a child out of care at an unreasonable hour. And I'd done my research, and I was just attacked, firstly by a head of social services who started screaming at me saying, what have you done to us? There's 50 care plans we've now got to implement because of you. I said, but you must have known about these kids. I went, yeah, but they didn't come to notice, so we weren't bothered. I said, well, they're making money. They're, and he said, well, we've got so much work to do. You've created an absolute nightmare for us. You're a headache. So that was made clear that I wouldn't get much help from them. And then Barnardo's, the woman in charge of that unit for Barnardo's, she then turned around and said, you're treading on toes. You know for a fact that a child will never betray their pimp. And I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, you'll never prove it because the kids won't, that's their source of money. I said, well, I know that. That's why I'm going on this other statute law that will give me a power to search and seize property and everything. And they went, well, you can't just do that. There's a protocol here. There is an officer, senior officer, who I'll be reporting you to because they're already dealing with it. I went, well, who's that? So he mentioned this name.
By senior officer, she meant a senior police officer.
Senior police officer, yeah, who wasn't Vice. Now, Vice had governance for that. This was some other man. And they said, there is an operation running. I said, well, I need to talk to this man. And she placed 20 actions on me to complete before I did any work. And each action could take me days.
So, sorry, who placed those actions on you?
This was Barnardo's. This because it was a partnership working. When you deal with children, it's all working together, And I was absolutely flabbergasted what was going on. And so I spoke to my inspector, and he said, well, just crack on. Don't worry about it. Crack on and do what you've got to do. So the next day I went out and I got a result straight away. I got a girl that was being pimped out, and I got a pimp, and it worked. So then I get a call from this high-ranking officer who's this chief superintendent. So I have to go up to one of the police buildings, and he said, just treading on toes, you got to back off. We've got an officer dealing with this. I said, well, dealing with what? Prostitution of children in care homes for London. We've got it under wraps. And I said, well, who is it? So he gave me the name of this girl, and I called her. And she said, it's a load of crap. She said, I've been to a meeting, but I've never dealt with any victims. And how can I nick? She said, it's just me. I don't even know where these kids' homes are. I've not even visited one. I said, so you're not investigating? She said, no, how can I? So it was a load of lies. So that was shut down, right? Then, lo and behold, I moved. And then I get a call that the girl that was at the Zoe, the young girl that was at the centre of the other operation, was found dead on the street in a suspicious overdose. Just found dumped in the street dead.
How old? Just remind us. Of
By this time, I think she was getting on for 15, 16, something around that area. You know, a year or so had passed.
So 15-year-old girls just found dead.
Key witness to this case, dumped on the street. And then it just absolutely it destroyed me, you know. And they never investigated another case of child prostitution. The Vice Unit never did. What happened then was I left. I'd got moved, so I ended up having to deal with other sorts of crime involving children, but was never dragged back into that area. I shut my mouth for quite a while, and then what happened was the Jimmy Savile scandal broke, and I thought, my God, it's not just me, there's others. And then Clive Driscoll came forward, and then Lenny Harper from the States of Jersey Police, you know, the senior officer there. He was running the care home inquiry in Hope de la Grange in Jersey, and it gave me better hope. But then that was shut down, and I can remember him on telly saying that it's now coconut. The lab report saying the bones they've seized are coconut and not bone, and I'm thinking it's been a cover-up. So I then came forward. About 2014, I went to my inspector first and said, look, I need to talk to someone. I want to make an allegation of serious corruption here involving child prostitution cover-ups. And he totally dismissed it. So I then went to the corruption command and I said, I need to speak to someone very, very senior. It has to be a detective and it has to be a woman. And he said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, I don't know. Women won't roll their trouser legs up, meaning a Masonic link, because without entering into the conspiracy realm again, Masonry does have a big, strong hold in the police. It has a hold in the police, but then when you become a detective, it intensifies, and when you're a detective on a specialist role, it is almost like a stick of rock, Masonry through it, you know. I'm not knocking it. I work with many of them. I've not got an issue with them, but it is another allegiance that you don't need.
Just
you know?
given a detached viewpoint, it has an impact.
It does, without a doubt. And I'll tell you how much it has an impact. When I went to a job agency to try and get work as a civilian detective, I was told by the agency, have you been or are you a Mason? And I said, well, why are you asking that? They said, we cannot take anyone who is or has been a Mason. I said, well, why is that? And they said, because it has ruined too many inquiries, and namely the Hillsborough inquiry was deliberately frustrated by the Masons, deliberately.
According to this security company?
According to this, recruitment. Yeah.
Recruitment company.
And that is they're one of the main ones for recruiting civilian investigators, and their baseline is the first question they ask you, are you a Mason?
Okay. So just sticking with what happened to you, so you decided you were going to whistle blow?
I whistle blew, and I made an allegation against a senior officer who since then had been promoted to one of the highest posts in the country. Made the allegation, and I was assured that this will be taken in the utmost seriousness, and don't worry, we will investigate it. So I said, okay. I then get informed by the Metropolitan Police Federation that I'm to be served with gross misconduct papers. I said, well, what have I done? They said, you've data protection violations. I said, well, I haven't violated anything. They said, well, don't worry, we're assured it'll be a management action. Right, okay. Then the police were dragging their heels over my allegations, so I pushed forward and they wouldn't reply to me. So I made a complaint to the IPCC, the Independent Police Complaints Commission. They said, we won't get involved. Then all of a sudden, my misconduct allegations have been elevated to gross misconduct. I'm like, really? Well, why? Well, I was told then, don't worry, we're going to look into it and it'll be resolved. I then get put in touch with an MP called Simon Danchuk, at the time was championing the abuse cover-ups. And you're seeing more and more cover-ups coming out, and one of the key ones was the Rotherham scandal. and there was a detective from Great Manchester Police called Maggie Oliver, and I was asked if I wouldn't mind being put in touch with Maggie Oliver. Her story is very similar to mine. So I met with Maggie Oliver, and her story was strikingly similar. And what she said to me was, John, watch it. She said, have they served you misconduct papers yet? I said, yeah. She said, you'll get arrested next because that's what they did to me. You'll put before a tribunal, you'll be found guilty and they will sack you. That's exactly what they did to me, and that's what they'll do to you. They'll raid your house, they'll do everything.
John, just tell us just really briefly, what was her story? You say it's strikingly similar. Was she dealing with children?
She was dealing with children from the care system in Rotherham, in South Yorkshire, I think, and Greater Manchester. It's come under the Greater Manchester, policing district, and it was young girls being groomed and pimped out by Asian minicab firms, everything else. But these kids were also the clientele of people that had a bit of money and everything else. And she exposed it, and she was bullied into silence, told to shut her mouth, it's not a problem, forget about it. And it was exactly the same as what I was dealing with, but on a provincial level. And her bullying that she encountered was exactly the same as mine. But she did get sacked, she got required to resign, and she was stitched up, by Peter Fahey, who was at the time the Chief Constable of Great Manchester Police. And it was the similarities were striking. I then get put in touch with a man called Lenny Harper, and Lenny Harper had exposed the child abuse, murder, and sexual abuse scandal in the Haute de la Grenne. And the other thing was that it had been covered by a really good friend and a proper activist, Bill Maloney, child abuse, and he'd been on his. So I got in touch with Lenny. So Lenny said, come and see me. So I went up to see Lenny, and he told me his story, and again, the similarities were absolutely unbelievable.
So there's a template in operation here as to what happens to police officers that stand up and say there's a cover-up of child abuse.
Yep, and also that they are bullied so monumentally that some of these coppers are committing suicide. I then get asked to go to a whistleblowers forum in Parliament, and there's a retired chief constable there called Tom Lloyd of Cambridgeshire, and he then hears my story and says, well, this is shocking, but you're not alone. And via that I get put in touch with a detective sergeant from Hampshire who had exposed a kids' home inquiry, child prostitution thing on the Isle of Wight. And he had been bullied to the point of almost suicide, and they'd arrested him again for minor data protection and other issues, and bullied him to the point of almost suicide. And he now campaigns for coppers that are suffering post-traumatic stress and suicidal. He's got an outreach group, and he then says, there's so many coppers are topping themselves, but this is what they will do. They will ruin you, John. So I've got 3 coppers, all of them that are uncovered child abuse, high-level child abuse, and all of them have been bullied monumentally to the point of virtual suicide, and each one of them warned me what would happen. So I thought, well, this is outrageous. The public need to know, and the police and the IPCC kept covering it up, refused to progress my allegation. The IPCC even said if I wrote to them again, they wouldn't even open my letters. So I then took the matter to the Cabinet. I got in touch with the Policing and Crime Minister, Mike Penning, and said, you need to sit down with me. And he did. Fair play to him, he did. He said he was shocked and stunned at what I'm saying. He afforded me privilege. I then informed the police that I'd spoken to him, and then they tried to get me done again on discipline, gross misconduct for talking to a politician. And luckily that got overturned because it was just a vicious attack, He then said, right, we will implement an independent inquiry into what's happened to you and to what's happening all told, because I said there is an algorithm of bullying. And
sorry to interject, did he did he acknowledge the extent of the child abuse, which is the heart of this matter? You'd obviously told him what you had discovered. Did he actually register that there was this happening?
Well, I told him. I said, this is massive. I said, the tentacles of this go right to the heart of the establishment, and this is causing the whole detriment to society, and it's probably even influencing politics. And I said, and I've got evidence of that, and I explained to him about the thing with Leon Britton. You know, and all the time it's coming out in the press that this man's innocent and everything else. But then Bernard Hogan-Howe, the commissioner of the Met Police, turned around and refused to apologise to Lady Britton. So I'm thinking, well, maybe he knows something that I know. So Mike Pennin then stopped all contact with me. I was assured by his wife he'll ring me, he'll update me, and I couldn't get hold of him at all. So the police then...
I just want to say, this is the man whose sole responsibility is policing.
Yeah. Policing.
And you are telling him of the cover-up of major crime involving children, young girls, and what he does is completely cuts you off.
What he said, I met him on quite a few occasions, and I got brought to his parliamentary office, his ministerial office, you know, and he's right next to Michael Gove. They share the same corridor. And I'm in there, and he turned around to me, and this were his exact words. He said, what concerns me most about this is the public perception when this gets out. And that's all he was worried about. You know, how's it going to look on the establishment when this goes out? But at the end of the day, I told him, and to my opinion, things might have changed. But as far as I'm aware, he's done nothing. He might surprise me yet, I'm not sure, but I've asked repeatedly for the investigation team to get in touch with me, and they haven't. Absolute nonsense, you know, that he come out with. And then he said to me, I give you my assurances that Bernard Hogan-Howe, who is a friend of mine, will be shocked when he finds out. So I said, well, are you going to tell him? He said, I will tell him. He will be told. And as far as I'm aware, he never told him. So in the end, I carried on back to work and everything else, and all of a sudden I found out that my allegations that were now sort of being ignored, the police's then sort of investigation of me for data protection had gone from management action, minor misconduct, which I would have denied anyway because I did bugger all wrong. It went from that to misconduct to gross misconduct. Now they've sent a file to the CPS for an impending prosecution against me. And I thought, right, well, I've had enough of this. This is outrageous. So I said, I got hold of the commissioner. And I said to the commissioner, I wrote to him.
This is Sir Bernard
Hogan-Howe. And I said, you know, the man that I've made serious allegations against, in which there was witnesses to this, has been promoted. Not only has been promoted, he's been promoted with royal assent and given the Queen's Police Medal 2 years after I made allegations. Now, the format is if you're under investigation for serious issues, you do not get promoted. Your career's on hold till it's sorted out. And I wanted then to get out the police, but they wouldn't let me resign because I was placed under investigation. So I couldn't do anything. I said, you've hounded me, you've destroyed me, you've ruined me, yet I've done nothing wrong. Now you want to prosecute me? I said, I'll tell you what, you put me before a court and I will tell the world, because it'll be public domain, that this is a vicious cover-up of a whistleblower for, you know, hindering and covering up child prostitution. And I told him everything, Bernard Hogan-Howe, put everything in the letter. But all of a sudden, everything changed. All of a sudden, the senior management, the assistant commissioners, they're behind me. They're no longer prosecuting me. They're trying to forward my early retirement and everything else. But and other things they did was that they halved my pay without even telling me. They cut my pay in half.
Right.
And which is all things I was told would happen.
Right, John, you're saying there that they're moving you towards early retirement,
yep.
Which obviously is of some comfort to you because you still have to live, and you're entitled to a pension and everything from your time serving in the police. What have they actually done to start to investigate the key thing of the massive cover-up of the abuse of children.
It was quite funny because in 2012 I was in Scotland Yard, and the witness I had in the room at the time when the senior officer bullied me saw me in Scotland Yard, and she came up to me and she burst into tears. She grabbed me, she said, "I've got quite a powerful job now," and she said, "I've got my own office in the yard, I need to talk to you, can you come and see me?" I said, "Yeah, I'll come." So I went to her office, and she just burst into tears. She grabbed hold of me, hugged me, and she said, "Can you ever forgive me for what happened?" And I said, "Well, what are you on about?" She said, "I watched them bully you and destroy you, and everything you said happened. That little girl died." I said, "Oh, yeah, I know about that." She said, "And since you did what you did, they never investigated another case of child prostitution." And that was 2004, 2005. They never investigated another case. So nearly 10 years of all those serious crimes. I mean, you're talking raping of children, just short of murder, really. In seriousness, they never investigated another. I mean, they even had a transgender crime unit. And transgender crime, it equated for like 0.001% of all. So there was a team investigating that, but child prostitution, there was nothing. And she said, "Everything you said was right. I left the unit because of how they treated you. Please forgive me."
Right.
So they never touched it after that.
John, you are still in a delicate situation with the police, so I'll say that we'll just end that bit there on your relationship and how things are going for leaving the police. Just to finish, give us what is your opinion of what you've uncovered? What is going on?
Well, funny enough, I was asked this when I was interviewed as a witness, and they said, "Why do you think they did this?" And I said, "Well, because they're involved. There is a cover-up, and these people are appointed into these key positions where they have total governance of all these allegations. So they can't be dealt with by any other unit other than the specialist unit. So there's like a filter they go through, and then internally in this unit they will be filtered again. What gets proceeded with and what doesn't, so that they have total autonomy on what they deal with and what they don't deal with. So these people are put in place to make sure these allegations don't get out. And it's not just that. All them years that I worked in this remit, we would get what they call referrals. Now, referrals could come from schools, referrals could come from playgroups, from wherever. And all the years I worked on child abuse investigations, I was aware of only once a referral coming through from NSPCC. Only once. Now, bear in mind, they've got Childline, and all them kids that will be ringing up Childline, especially when Jimmy Savile got nicked and everything else, why didn't they ever come through? And these people are filters. And my opinion is they are filters that these people are deliberately put in there to protect those that are involved, deliberately.
John, thank you very much for having the courage to come and talk us through that. And I am very, very sure that the people that listen into this interview will not only be shocked at what you've said, but they will also be putting together information in their minds because, of course, you've taken us through those experiences. And what have we seen? We've seen more and more of this coming up to the surface in the public press and media, all then dismissed, and it's all suppressed. It all drifts away into the long grass. And you are one of, we now know, a number of officers who've had the courage to stand up and say, no, this is real, it's going on, and you've paid a pretty heavy price for it. So I'm going to say I think this will really get people thinking, and thank you very much for having the courage to talk.
No, that's quite right. I mean, all I will say is people have come forward, but they've always got retired before their name.
Retired before their name. What a statement for John to come forward with, that police officers who dare to stand up and expose the cover-up of child abuse are bullied, harassed and retired. Against the background of child abuse which we are seeing across the country, whether it's Hollygregg in Scotland, whether it's Rotherham, whether it is Melanie Shaw with the Beechwood Nottingham abuse, Mickey Summers, another name there. Across the country, we are seeing time and time again child abuse survivors coming forward and telling their story. And now, with the help of John, we can really get to understand that the people covering up this abuse are people in the highest echelons of society. They are the members of Parliament, they're the lords, they're the senior police officers, they are the establishment figures, and as we have heard, worst of all perhaps, they are some of the very charities that say they are there to protect children. One current case that provides a background to all of the things that John has been talking about must be the Brian and Janice Doherty case. You can listen to the interviews with this mum and dad on UK Column website, but this is the story of parents whose only crime, if I can call it that, is to report that a man tried to buy their son for sex, and when they report that incident to the police in Scotland, they become the criminals, they become hunted by social services, and ultimately they are the parents who have 4 children taken from them by armed Garda police in Ireland. There can only be one explanation for how that was possible, and that is that there is, as John says, a conspiracy at the highest levels to protect those who abuse children, and in particular to protect those at the highest levels of society.